So please, Ramon, you can begin, please.
Okay. European languages share many sayings and proverbs, such as comparisons are odious. Proverbs such as these are formally and semantically equivalent, but they may differ greatly as far as frequency and context of use are concerned. In order to compare frequency from a synchronic point of view, we have used the 1010 corpus family, which is a family of text corpora created from the web. All 1010 corpora are prepared according to the same criteria and can be regarded as comparable corpora. The corpora are built using technology specialized in collecting only linguistically valuable web content. Here are the 4 corpora and their respective number of words. When these 4 equivalent proverbs are compared regarding frequency of use, these are the results. You have on the left the total number of occurrences, and on the right the number of occurrences or instances per million words. The frequency in Spanish is 15 times higher than in the other 3 languages. This paper inquires into the degree of comparability of 2 well-known proverbs, namely, a rolling stone gathers no moss, and the cowl or the habit does not make the monk, and their equivalents in French, Spanish, and Italian, not only concerning their frequency of use, but also concerning their semantics and contexts of use, both from a diachronic and a synchronic perspective. And now to my friend and colleague, Paolo Rondinelli.
A rolling stone gathers no moss is found in nearly every language and is known to have existed for at least 3,000 years, or even more, as we'll see in a minute. Traditionally, this proverb has been used to emphasize the advantage of geographical stability, as can be read in Nathan Bailey's 1721 Etymological English Dictionary. The meaning is clear. Moss grows very slowly from spores, which need time to anchor themselves, so a still, undisturbed stone makes a good foundation for moss to flourish. Similarly, a productive life can only come from taking root by settling down in one place. In this slide, we focus on our attention on the last part of the definition in Bailey's dictionary, where references to Latin and Greek are made, accompanied by equivalents not only in English but also in French and Italian. So let's look first at the classical languages. Saxum volutum non obducitur musco probably corresponds to the earliest known Latin attestation and can be traced back to the Sententiae by Publilius Syrus. Lithos culindomenos tofucos upoiei is an iambic trimeter that we find in the first edition of the Adagia by Erasmus of Rotterdam. Erasmus translates it as musco lapis volutus aut obducitur. From Erasmus's comment, it's clear that the saying was widespread in his time and circulated in an almost identical form, but obviously in the cultured circles of Europe among the members of the Res Publica Literarum of New Latin. Absent in the collections of Zenobius and Diogenes' 2nd century AD, this paroimia was certainly alive and kicking in the Byzantine age. This is demonstrated by its presence in the collection of Apostolius, who is the source of Erasmus. The Adagia made this Oriental proverb famous throughout Europe. However, there are several elements that lead us to think that the spread of the proverb took place also locally, orally, and popularly. A double channel of dissemination, therefore, leads to hypothesize an already medieval circulation. In fact, there are no clear indications in Erasmus's comment of classical precedents. Furthermore, the adagium is worded as Saxum volutum non obducitur musco, a medieval Sprichwort recorded by Hans Walter. According to Renzo Tosi, this proverb would be a specific actualization of a more generic proverb that warned against constant changes. In any case, morality is conservative and remained so from the 14th to the 20th century, so much so that we can speak of a real topos of European culture against instability. In the Spanish diachronic corpus corde, piedra movediza nunca mojo la cobija occurs 7 times between 1300 and 1624. However, the presence in the typical Spanish genre of the picaresque novel is significant and equally interesting the negative semantic value attached to it. As for French, Pierre qui roule n'amasse pas mousse appears for the first time in the 16th century and is kept alive in aphoristic and manipulated forms such as Robespierre qui roule n'amasse pas mousse. In the Anglo-Saxon context, we can go back to a version of Piers Plowman. Also interesting is the presence in John A. Wood's collection and in Sir Humphrey Gilbert's Queen Elizabeth's Academy. In Italian literature, it goes back to Petrarch. In the second epistle of the 9th book of the Seniles, he speaks of his constant restlessness and his love for trouble. Then he recalls the memory of his late steward in Vaucluse, Ramon Monet, who used to tease him good-naturedly for his constant traveling. When he saw him leave or return, he used to say, ut videos seper taberis, nunquam vero mihi crede di taberis. After all, a peculiarity of this proverb is precisely the positive value of moss interpreted as wealth. Later on, Petrarch wrote, Proverbium vetus est nostrorum hominum, non facit muscum sepe volutus lapis. So look at the segment underlined and in red, nostrorum hominum. Who was Petrarch referring to? Most probably to the people of Tuscany of those times. And this tells us about its oral dissemination among the ordinary people, which is confirmed in a couple of variant forms, one of which is the Italian sasso che rotola non fa mosche, already attested by Francesco Serdonati, where mosche, flies, is but the phonological misunderstanding of muschio, moss. The other variant form is dialectal, sasso che ruzzola un fa carpiccia, still used today in the Val d'Orcia in Tuscany, as Silvia Rizzo has well demonstrated in one of her essays. Indeed, just by thumbing through the dictionary of Riccardo Schwamenthal and Michele Straniero, one can find a dozen dialectal variant forms of this proverb. So, the idea of the inherent danger of traveling is indirectly associated with the second proverb we are dealing with. The habit does not make the monk. In medieval times, in fact, many travelers were monks and received hospitality because of their clothes they wore. But those who hid under the habit were not always monks. One can also say the habit makes the monk, which must not be taken as an anti-proverb, but as another distinct traditional proverb. But let's focus on the habit does not make the monk. This proverb has a Latin origin as well. The word habit can be rendered by various words, habitus, cucullus, vestimentum, and the conclusion is always non facit monachum. The first attestation from the 11th century is from St. Ansel. As we know, there were variant forms in the classical world, such as barba non facit philosophum, in which, however, the element that characterizes the medieval era, the monk in his habit, is obviously missing. Also in this case, we start from the Middle Ages to get to the present day through the double channel of literature and of oral circulation in colloquial contexts. Let's see in particular some literary attestations from Shakespeare to Balzac, going through Mallara, and focusing on the case of the Italian Alessandro Manzoni, The Betrothed, chapter 19. The scene involves two characters, a churchman, the provincial father, and the secular man, the Count Zio, who speak about a third character, Fra Cristoforo, and his reputation. The provincial father refers to the glory of the religious habit and says that Friar Cristoforo has changed since he took his vows. I would like to believe it, replies Count Zio, but the habit does not make the monk. He would have rather said the wolf loses its fur, but not its vice, observes Manzoni. But eventually he replaced it by a softer, although less pertinent proverb. So in conclusion, what we want to highlight here is the meaning of the word abito, which in this context seems to take on a different sense from that of clothing, and it's closer to the etymological one of unconscious repeated action. Just as the wolf does not lose his habit, so Fra Cristoforo remains the person he is and does not lose his habit, that is, his bad habits. And now, to my friend and colleague, Ramon, Martí Solano.
As for myself, I'll be dealing with synchronic aspects of these two proverbs. First of all, if we have a look at dictionary definitions, we can observe that the meaning of a rolling stone gathers no moss has evolved from its origins, despite the fact that the Collins Online Dictionary still defines it from a negative perspective. The Cambridge Online Dictionary, however, marks it as old-fashioned and provides both the negative and the positive connotations attached to it, which is quite revealing of the way in which a proverb is used today. In this sense, George Lundberg, in his 1958 article, points out the generational gap as regards the interpretation of this proverb and writes, I quote, "My interpretation of the proverb in this traditional manner brought out expressions of surprise and disagreement among the members of the class of advanced undergraduates," end of quote. He concludes by saying that his students understand the meaning as, I quote, "Go where the opportunities seem best at a given time. Don't get tied down to any single place or occupation. In short, don't let moss grow on you," end of quote, which summarizes rather well the famous American sense of mobility and independence. Later on, Kirchenblatt-Ginblet argues in her 1973 article that not only are there intracultural differences in the understanding and variation from individual to individual, but also that the proverb has come to mean that it is good to keep moving because then one does not become weighed down with a family and material possessions. The negative associations that gathering moss has acquired can clearly be seen in these two examples taken from the press. In number one, the constituent moss is associated with problems, and number two, encourages readers to keep the proverbial stone clean by, I quote, "staying busy and constantly on the move." It should be added, by the way, that the derivative words mossy and mossback, which literally mean covered in moss, have developed a common figurative sense, especially in American English, denoting an extremely conservative or reactionary attitude, or describing someone attached to antiquated ideas, which obviously adds to the current negative interpretation of gathering moss. When looking at frequency, we realize that the proverb is hardly used today, even though the different variant forms, to be found mainly in Italian and in Spanish, have also been included in the results of this research. Only in French does the proverb seem to be just a bit more frequent. It's interesting that the same semantic difference linked to a generational gap is also found in Canadian French, as can be observed in example 3, which is a conversation between a father and his son. The father has to explain to his son the original or traditional meaning of the expression as the youth interprets it in the aforementioned American sense. Ça veut dire tout le contraire. That means exactly the opposite, says the father. No examples have been found in the online archives of the Spanish newspapers El País and ABC. This one here is the only example found in another Spanish newspaper, La Vanguardia, which again is quite revealing of the semantic evolution of the proverb. Both the modern and the traditional interpretation are explained, and the journalist concludes by adding that the second interpretation belongs to the past, whereas the first represents our current vision of the world, or otherwise stated by Salvador Dalí, uno debe estar en continuo movimiento. One has to be in continuous movement. A similar lack of examples concerns Italian. Extremely few occurrences in the Tenton corpus and no occurrences at all in the online archives of the newspaper La Repubblica. The extract on the slide comes from an Italian travel website and shows the modern sense of the proverb, an English proverb according to them, that they interpret as la gente sempre in movimento si mantiene giovane. People who are always on the move stay young. As for the second proverb, the cowl does not make the monk, as can be seen in the corpus results, and always from a synchronic point of view, it is very infrequent in English and in Spanish, but rather more common in French and Italian if you look at the percentages that represent the number of instances per million words. The proverb that means that you cannot know what something or someone is like by looking only at their appearance faces stiff competition from another proverb, you can't judge a book by its cover, that bears the exact meaning and can be used in the same contexts. Corpus results speak for themselves. The cowl and the monk have fallen out of fashion and have been supplanted by the book and its cover. It's been extremely difficult to find examples in the contemporary use of this proverb in English compared to the other three languages. In the very few examples I have found, the proverb is used metalinguistically, either preceded by the introductory phrase as the saying goes, as in number 6, or interpreted as a translation of an original French proverb equivalent of imagine what, don't judge a book by its cover, as in number 7. These two examples in French, number 8 and number 9, show how the traditional sense of the proverb is contradicted. Reality shows that the traditional meaning of the proverb is not true. Everyday experience contradicts the message found in the proverb. Yes, appearance matters, and people are being judged, not for what they are, but for what they look, but for the way they look, sorry. The same observation as with French can be made concerning Spanish. The underlined words in 10 translate as, even though they say that the habit does not make the monk, the new relation between a man and his attire certainly does. In 11, we read, the well-known proverb, the habit does not make the monk, proves ineffective in this program. Finally, the Italian proverb follows suit, and we can read that it is not true that the habit does not make the monk in 12, and that the habit does not make the monk, but speaks volumes about the person wearing it in 13. We can conclude by saying that the first proverb, a rolling stone gathers no moss, although very frequent from the 16th to the 20th century with a negative meaning, is very infrequent nowadays in all 4 languages, and has experienced a dramatic semantic change from a negative to a positive meaning. As regards the second one, the cowl does not make the monk, also very frequent from the Middle Ages until today, particularly in French starting from 1700, is very frequent nowadays in English and in Spanish, but more common in French and Italian. Even though its sense has not changed over time, its meaning tends to be contradicted in context. The diachronic development and the synchronic analysis of these two proverbs lead to a clear observation. Society changes, and the meaning and use also change accordingly. And here are the references. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Paolo, and Ramon, for your beautiful presentation and strong one. So I think here we have some questions for you. Maria del Carmen ask you, have you investigated the habit makes the monk? At least in Spanish, it exists in current use.
If I may answer, yes, we have looked, we knew obviously that we have the other proverb, not only in Spanish, but in the other languages. But we have not gone into it because we just wanted to look at these two ones, that is the cowl does not make the monk, and a rolling stone gathers no moss. We will probably look into that for the publication. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramon.